Good morning, everyone, and welcome into Wake and Take. It's your boy Jason, and we've got some football to talk about today. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Theo Gremminger, as we're going to talk about everything you need to know about this year's running backs, the zero RB strategy, the hero RB strategy. We're going to talk Deadzone. We're going to talk handcuffs. We're going to talk some head-to-head running back decisions as well. It's going to be a great one. So go ahead, take out your coffee, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Theo, how's it going?
It's going very well. Excited to be back on Wake and Take. Excited to talk running backs with you, Jason. I know you're in here grinding every day in Wake and Take, so it's always nice to step in here and talk a little ball with you.
Yeah, man, and this is a very short notice one. For everyone not in the know, Theo does an incredible article every year about just the zero and hero RB strategy, as well as covering the Deadzone and handcuffs. Really, you cover a lot of running back stuff throughout the season, but especially right now, this article series dropped this week, and I reached out to you. I was like, this is a great article. I would love to have you come on, talk a little bit of running backs, and so that's what we're going to do. So why don't we go ahead and just give like a brief overview? I know we all kind of know it in the space, but when we're talking about these terms, really, what does it mean?
So which one do you want to go with first, Jason?
I guess we'll start. Let's start with hero, and then we'll go zero, and then we'll go dead zone.
So a hero running back approach is like old school drafters would have called it like punting RB2. So the general idea is you want to draft an anchor RB with reliable volume and reliable work week to week, and potentially a player who not only has reliable volume but can give you some spike weeks. You want to have one that you can lean on heavily. Mm-hmm. Generally, the hero RB approach has been attempted from the first round. You're seeing some hero RB builds this year where you anchor in the second round or even the third round, because there are people who are enthusiastically drafting Jonathan Taylor, enthusiastically drafting Saquon Barkley. Those kind of guys are second round running backs that sort of present the same model. And then when you go dip into the third round, you know, we occasionally see the Devon Achane, the Travis Etienne, and the big dog Derrick Henry, even though Henry's settling in more and more in the mid-second. So the idea is I get my running back, and then I ignore the position in order to load up at other positions and avoid potential landfalls in the periods of time in the draft where we oftentimes see failure and guys who fail to deliver on ADP and bust or get injured.
Yeah, hero RB is always my favorite build. I love locking down my running back and then kind of waiting for the rest of it, because it is pretty easy, especially in season, to find that value off the waiver wire or like a handcuff or something. Like it's pretty easy to kind of scrounge that together. So for some, they'll try that zero running back strategy. And that's just basically waiting as long as possible to draft a running back on your team. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, or is that kind of encapsulated?
So zero RB is one where like even if you ask like and you know, I'll have Sean Siegel back on. So basically Sean Siegel is probably, you know, the one in the industry sort of known for being the zero RB guy over at RotoViz. And even if you kind of ask him to kind of define it completely, there's a lot of like nuances. Chris Vaccaro, a friend of Player Profiler, last year's host of Fantasy Empire, has won some major high stakes events using the zero RB. Tommy Libretti took down the NFFC primetime as like $250,000 a couple years ago using zero RB. So like the whole zero RB doesn't work argument, it's not true. You just have a slightly less room for error, and it's a little bit more of a having to thread the needle at times. But the zero RB strategy basically is I want to win in the flex. My flex should be better than anybody in the league's flex. My wide receivers usually get an emphasis, but a properly built zero RB team should have an edge at quarterback and tight end. You're basically avoiding drafting a running back until your other starting positions are filled, or most of them are filled. Where you start drafting running backs, that's where like the arguments in the community start. So some people might say like, you know, any dead zone running back is sort of something I'm going to kind of avoid in a zero RB build because I'm kind of losing my edge. Then there are some people who say not only that, Jason, not only do I have to fill out my non-running back positions, but I need to build wide receiver depth so I can maintain my edge, maybe dive into like the upside pick. So there's really not a great definition, but zero RB is interesting because of the current climate, because we're seeing all these wide receivers steamed up and we're seeing the dead zone sort of push down. So in years past, you'd have a zero RB manager who would have to like go to battle in week one with like maybe a satellite back, maybe a handcuff back, maybe a handcuff plus back. But now it's not hard to find starting running backs sort of in the 8th round, the 7th round, even like creeping into the 9th round. Yeah. So it's an interesting climate for zero RB, especially where you're not going to get boxed out at wide receiver, because that's a lot of the problems in early drafts now you're seeing is wide receivers just get cleaned up. Anybody who plays underdog, or if you're playing early redraft like FFPC, NFFC, wide receiver just gets cleaned up. Wide receiver 2s, 3s even, Jason.
Yeah, it's honestly like that kind of end of 2nd, 3rd round range right now is my least favorite part of drafting. Every time I'm sitting at the clock staring at those wide receivers or like Kyron Williams and Devon Achane, I just have a little bit of a panic attack. I'm not going to lie, Theo. It's a tough decision to make.
Well, it's funny because philosophically, like when you look at the ADP on underdog, and you specifically look at like running back versus wide receiver, you're taking guys that are like low end wide receiver 2s over potentially guys who are still RB1s. Like when it's just the fundamental nature of the shift, and you still are considering doing it because of the scarcity, and you're worried about getting stuck with these guys who can't give you weekly wide receiver production. So the climate is definitely making it very tempting. It used to be like a zig while others zag, where like 10 guys in your draft were going running back early and you would be the one to go wide receiver. Now sort of everybody's going wide receiver. So you don't get boxed out at a position that is the most in demand.
Yeah. I that's a good way to put it. So we'll move on to the dead zone real quickly. And that's basically kind of round 3-ish to like round 7-ish of a range of running backs. There's a lot of good values in there. I guess it wouldn't be considered zero RB, but generally, if you find yourself taking an RB in the dead zone, are you kind of doubling down like a Rachaad White and an Isaiah Pacheco? Like, would you feel comfortable doing a hero with a dead zone, or you kind of you want to get 2 in that range?
I actually think that it's interesting because some people, I did this article, and some people were pushing back on Reddit, sort of like my definition of the dead zone. So generally, the dead zone was, we would look at it would be backs that were getting pushed up and sort of like sucked into like a gravitational pull, because all the RB1s clear up. So then the RB2s get drafted like where the low end RB1 should get drafted, and so on. And it just sort of messes up the entire market. So you get these guys who would be 3rd round picks, but they would be like low end RB2s, and the bust rates on those guys were significant. There's actually an argument over the years that simply drafting the RB3 range players, the hit rates are closer to the RB2 range players than you would think. The market doesn't always price out like RB15 through 30 correctly. A lot of like discrepancy. But what's interesting, Jason, is the pushback I got was the dead zones move so much that you really should have listed it this way. And my take is, we're just so used to referring to the dead zone as like round 3 through 6 that let's just keep referring to it. But now we have to understand that, you bring up like Rachaad White, like guys like Isaiah Pacheco, these guys are high-end RB2s and low-end RB1s, and now we're able to draft them in that range. So what's interesting is last year, we saw 4 out of the top 5 finishers in PPR scoring at the running back position drafted like round 3 or later. And Travis Etienne was the highest drafted of those guys. And, like he was not like a lock to be an early 3rd at all. Like that's a guy you could get in the 4th and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's more of that's the traditional dead zone. But we need to understand that the dead zone's a little bit different than it used to be. There's still going to be busts in there, but there's also potentially larger rewards, like we saw last year. Guys like Breece Hall, guys like Rachaad White, just breaking through with big seasons. That sort of profile is going to be there a little bit more, but we still have to sift out, because you don't want to just blindly attack it because of potential values, because that's when you're going to hit the bus and hit the landmines.
That's for sure. We'll talk about the dead zone a little bit later in the show. I want to get your take on, I guess, do you have a favorite strategy, or do you kind of just let it happen as it may?
I'm like Bruce Lee. I'm water. I step into the streets and I don't want to pigeonhole myself into a strategy. I don't know who said this to me, but somebody in the high stakes streets at some point made the comment, and I say it every year. Every single strategy works if you select the correct players. So when you get into a draft, generally, Jason, I'll say the majority of my drafts this year on like underdog, because of the nature of the beast, I've been probably taking a wide receiver first, just in the majority of them. Mm-hmm. That being said, hero RB I've attempted. And then in the hard way draft, which is this very difficult FFPC draft that I do early in the season, it's like there's a lot of like former overall winners and a couple of industry guys in it. And I've done very well in that league. I ended up with 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds, just because of the way the value was shifting. So I think I'm sort of open to any strategy this year. Mm-hmm. I think that when you get too dogmatic into, I need to do this strategy, you're going to miss into potential values in your draft. And you need to be able to kind of roll with the punches and shift, because you never know kind of the nature of a draft until you're actually in it.
Yeah, I think it is pretty ADP dependent. Or I guess not ADP dependent, where you're picking from dependent. Like it's sure. Pretty hard to take that reach sometimes. As much as I love a Bijan Robinson, a Breece Hall, I do still kind of like those wide receivers over them. Which brings me to my point, or a question, I guess. Christian McCaffrey pretty much widely the 101, but Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, I think have a very similar ceiling going a little bit later in the first round. I mean, I know that you're never really going to be at the 101 and be like, oh, I'm going to take Breece Hall, but just kind of at ADP, what's your I guess analysis on these 3 running backs right now?
Of these 3 running backs at ADP right now, it's easily Bijan Robinson for me.
Okay.
And I like, for me, it's a Christian McCaffrey. If I had a ton of 101s, and certainly on underdog, I've taken some Christian McCaffrey at the 101, but there's a little tiny hint of trepidation when it comes to CMC. Call me an ageist if you will, Jason, but this is like uncharted territory. We've had back-to-back seasons with older running backs, and older, by NFL definition, these guys are obviously younger than I am, but older running backs finishing as the RB1 overall. When Austin Eckler did it, he was the most experienced running back to do it since like Jamal Charles. And then we saw a second season where Christian McCaffrey did it in, I believe last year was his 7th season in the league. Jason, correct me if I'm wrong. CMC's going into year 8 in his career. We'll double check that. I don't want to sound. No, it's 9. It's year 9.
11?
No, CMC hasn't been in the league 11 years.
Oh wait, no. 2017 through 2020 is listed twice on it. 2017 to 2023, so 1, 2, 3. Year 8.
So year 8, but it's because of the trade, so they listed it twice on the player profiler. So like a year 8 running back finishing as RB1 overall is historically a poor bet. CMC can still do it, but the one thing I didn't like about the profile last year was, and this wasn't necessarily CMC's fault, but they got away from using him as a receiver as heavily as he has been in the past. And sort of that's the longevity argument with Eckler, with CMC, where these guys can still go out and catch 95 passes. But CMC's dropped into the 60s reception-wise last year. He scored a ton of touchdowns, and he also had a ton of volume. The 49ers have said several times over that they want to manage his workload a little more. It's just, all these teams want to manage everybody's workload. When push comes to shove, the offensive coordinators are still going to lean into their main man like CMC when the game is on the line. But at the end of the day, I want a team that we think could win the Super Bowl, wants to manage a workload. It's year 8 for CMC, and the receptions went down to in the 60s last year, and he scored a ton of touchdowns. For me, at the 101, I don't necessarily want to take him more than sometimes. It's not like I must take him every time. For me, I think my 101 right now is CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb is 25 years old. I think he is going to lead the NFL in targets. I think he's going to lead the NFL in receptions. We've had 3 straight years where the player that led the league in targets, led the league in receptions, finished as wide receiver 1 overall. I want to bet on that as a 25-year-old. And So whatever. CMC though, like again, I'm not saying he's going to fall flat on his face. I'm not an idiot. CMC is still the man. But at the end of the day, Bijan Robinson last year, the one kind of argument against Bijan coming out was this is a guy who is going to fail to receive targets at the NFL level. Last year, he was top 5 in the NFL in targets at the running back position. He had one of the highest target totals we've seen, top 10 all time for a rookie in the NFL. This is a target earner at the running back spot. We also don't have to manage the workload. Bijan Robinson is going to get the ball every single chance that the Falcons have to give it to him. This is a team that views themselves as the favorites in their division. I think it's a winnable division for them. I think Atlanta's going to put themselves in a great spot. I think they're going to lean on Bijan Robinson, and betting on a year 2 back to finish RB1 overall is a much better historical bet. And you're telling me that I'm able to get Bijan Robinson in the middle of the first round as opposed to CMC, where if I want CMC, I have to use the 101 on him. Bijan Robinson's the one I like. And Breece Hall's fine. I've taken some Breece Hall. I like taking Breece Hall when he falls. And I think that's the way I'm playing Breece Hall at ADP. Breece Hall, I don't think I'm as comfortable as some to take him like at the 105. But sometimes in some drafts, because of the wide receiver climate, he falls to like the 111, the 110. I had an FFPC best ball draft where I drafted him at the 111, and I felt really good about that. For me, there's a little bit more behind Breece Hall that I think might get weekly touches. I think Braylon Allen, they're going to give some touches to. I think Tyler Algier will be a change of pace, but really more of like a direct handcuff. Breece Hall is fantastic, led the NFL in receptions last year. I just think that the Atlanta Falcons offense is one I'm going to bet on slightly more than the Jets. And Bijan, I like a little bit more as a player than Breece Hall. But Breece Hall is fine. Don't get me wrong. Take him in the end of the first. But in your ADP argument, give me all the Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, I'm with you step for step. Nothing makes me happier than having like a 109 or 110 and one of Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall falling to me. Like that is the greatest feeling in the world. Whereas it's like you have that 101 and you kind of have to press the Christian McCaffrey button and it doesn't feel great. Even if he produces there, like it's like you had to. I don't know. So I like going with those two. I do want to make a little bit of a case for Breece Hall. I do believe that with Aaron Rodgers coming back from his Achilles, we're going to see a lot of dump offs. I would not be surprised if he reaches that 95 targets kind of around again, leading the NFL in both receptions and targets again for Breece Hall. I think is well within the range of outcomes. But like you said, the Atlanta Falcons offense figures to be a lot more explosive. I think Bijan Robinson will just really just explode for touchdowns this year, rushing and receiving. I'm very much in on him this year. So that's my hero RB. Bijan Robinson for sure. Living in Atlanta, I mean, I was doing it last year, unfortunately, too. Not gonna lie, but so that's good takes. We'll move on to the second round. And for me, we mentioned Jonathan Taylor earlier. To me, though, it's Saquon Barkley or Jahmyr Gibbs if I'm doing it. I'm a little bit scared of Anthony Richardson taking some of the ceiling away from Jonathan Taylor. Does that concern you at all? Or I guess when you're in the second round for your hero RBs?
I have Jahmyr Gibbs a tier above Saquon Barkley. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a top 3 running back this year. I've said it on the Sonic Truth. I think that Jahmyr Gibbs, one thing that's funny about Jahmyr Gibbs is the profile, like last year at this time, the bull case for Gibbs was he's going to have a Reggie Bush-like receiving outcome in his rookie year. That didn't happen. He only caught 52 passes, and he still managed to give us top 10 running back production, and he was really strong on the second half of the season. I think that using Gibbs more as a receiver in year 2 is going to be a big emphasis of the Lions' attack. Gibbs is too good of a receiver not to see his catch total improve by 15 to 20 receptions. I think if we had to pick a running back that's going to go way, way up in terms of total receptions, Gibbs would be one I would bet on. So Saquon, that's really it, Jason. When it comes down to it, the RB1 overall over the last 11 years has averaged over 80 receptions a year. Saquon's not going to get that in Philadelphia. Saquon's bet is yardage and touchdowns. I think he'll deliver fine. I think I don't think he's a bust where he's going to go, but Gibbs could be a league winner when he falls into the second round. I just don't see that with Saquon. There is some multiverse where Saquon Barkley gets like 16 touchdowns this year. That could be the one where he really, really burns you. But if it's what he gave you in New York, which is like a 10 touchdown season, then I don't see him being the league winner in that range. Gibbs is the guy who could go nuclear. Gibbs is one where he could outscore CMC, Bijan, Breece Hall, if it all sort of falls into place, despite the presence of David Montgomery. So give me that upside with Gibbs.
I like the upside argument. I mean, you look at playerprofiler.com, and I mean, you see he only averaged 3.5 receptions per game. That's almost laughable for a running back receiving talent of Jahmyr Gibbs' caliber. So I do expect that to go up this year. There's around 250 targets to go around. If I remember correctly, if you add up Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, and Jahmyr Gibbs targets from last year, there's still like 250 to go around with Josh Reynolds' department.
And also like the thing that Detroit, the argument that Detroit is going to be exactly the same, I think that's when we need to take a step back and look at what the environment was for Detroit last year. Detroit last year, like, they were super, super young. Jameson Williams, basically a first-year guy in terms of experience. Sam Laporta, a rookie. Jahmyr Gibbs, a rookie. And they had all these young guys sort of thrown into the mix, and they still average the top 5 in terms of points per game scored as a team. So they could go absolutely nuclear this year with more experience. Jared Goff settled in. Jared Goff has also improved both seasons under Ben Johnson. Like, Goff is really in a good spot with this offense, and I think that's sort of like a pie grows larger type argument for Gibbs.
Yeah, I'm expecting huge things for this Lions offense. You know me, I can't quit Jameson Williams, but I especially can't quit really anyone there. I will say for the case for Saquon Barkley, DeAndre Swift did have 1,000 rush yards, around 40 receptions, and 200 receiving yards last year. I do see Saquon Barkley's athleticism probably leading to a bit more than that in terms of just the efficiency. And I want to say there's about 80-something targets to all the running backs in the Eagles offense last year. So if Barkley can get into the 50, 60 receptions, I do think he is a steal at his ADP right now. But it's a lot of ifs. I mean, if they still run the tush push, then we're losing touchdowns. If he keeps falling at the one like Swift did last year, then we're losing touchdowns. That is a really good point to bring up, in that a lot of Saquon is going to have to come from those TDs. So I like the Jahmyr Gibbs take. Let's go to move on to this dead zone, because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I'm going to throw Kyren Williams and Achane in here. And I'll say that my last guy is probably like Zamir White. When I kind of look at this, do you have a favorite target in the dead zone, and would you make any of them your hero?
I would have no problem making Devon Achane my hero running back when he falls into the 3rd round. I also would not have an issue with Travis Etienne when he falls into the 3rd round. I think both of those guys have big time potential to return value on their ADP. I think both of those guys have what we want to see in the dead zone. A lot of times the big dead zone winner is going to be guys who can catch the football, they have dependable volume, and they have a little bit of unknown upside. I think with both of those guys, there is a case where they not only beat their ADP, but they beat their ADP very well. Devon Achane, I talk about him all the time. I mean, you talk about a guy who could lead all running backs in points per game this year. He's definitely in the mix. And Travis Etienne took a massive step forward as a receiver, and wonder if this is like the de facto year 3 for Travis Etienne, that they don't give him even more opportunities out of the backfield, where suddenly he's brushing up on 65 receptions, 70 receptions. Even if the touchdowns regress a little bit, if we see him kind of mature as a receiver out of the backfield, especially with the changes that they have at wide receiver last year, from last year to this year, with 2 new outside threats for Trevor Lawrence, maybe they lean on Etienne a little bit more as a receiver. So I like both of those guys. And then when you go a little bit further down in the dead zone, I mean, certainly Pacheco's interesting. There's a bunch of guys this year, though, Jason, because of the kind of the nature of the beast and the ADP cost, that I think could return some value. I've liked Ramondre Stevenson, and that's a guy where you can get him as like a 7th round pick now. Yeah. So he's not much different than a guy like Zamir White or Najee Harris or Aaron Jones around him. But with Ramondre, I think that this is a situation where it could be a little bit of a post-type sleeper. Last year, we saw him steamed up in the ADP market. Now he's pushed down. They gave him the contract. This is a guy who's already given us a 69 reception season. And I realize it was sort of that's what the Patriots could do that year. They're going to dump down to Stevenson. But at the end of the day, he has shown that ceiling where he can catch passes. He has the size and the pass catching ability, and he has the ability to take volume, where I think I'm getting a little bit of a discount on Mondre right now because people don't want to draft Patriots. They're scared to draft Patriots. But I think Mondre, where he's going to have RB1 usage, and he's being drafted sort of as a low end RB2. I think he's pretty safe pick where he's going. Joe Mixon, I think, is super interesting because I think Houston's offense is going to score a ton of points. Mixon's at a very nice ADP where last year he was like a top 6 running back producer. Now you're paying about RB15 prices for him. And he's certainly very affordable on like underdog. So there's a lot of players in this range that I think are super interesting this year when we're talking about like the dead zone running backs.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take it because this is it's really, really a great range. In fact, I probably can't even call myself a hero RBer because usually if I have Bijan, I am kind of getting someone here in this dead zone because I, like you said, these like they have fallen because of everyone's kind of bumping up of the wide receivers, and it's kind of hard not to press some of these running back buttons, especially the aging running backs. You mentioned Joe Mixon. I mean, like he's done nothing but produce in his entire career. They faded out Dameon Pierce completely last year in favor of Devin Singletary, and he was electric. So I really do. I mean, I love that call. I love them all in the dead zone, really. And I'm excited to see who ends up being the guy, which begs the question, though. So we're here in the dead zone. We're moving away from it. How, like, where's the last running back you would take if you're doing a 0 RB build? Like, how far are you really going to push it?
Well, again, if you're in the 0 RB, if you start attacking 0 RB, I don't want to lose my edge doing it. And I actually started a draft recently that I think is strong, where Jonathan Brooks was my RB1, and it's like a late 6th round RB, and I leaned into him because of the upside. When I'm drafting, so if you're in it's a little, put some context to this. If you're in a 1 QB league, or excuse me, not a 1 QB league, but like a single league, like a standalone home league, where you're competing against 12 other managers, then you can cut it off, Jason, and play it a little safer and make sure, you could maybe get a 5th round running back, dive into someone with expected volume. But I don't mind pushing it a little bit when I get into sort of more competitive drafts, maybe a larger scale competition. So like an FFPC Fantasy Pros draft, I'm competing against 12 others, but then there's a chance to get into like a playoffs. Mm-hmm. I feel like I lose my edge if I start panicking at running back. So my build was I ended up with a Mark Andrews in the 3rd round to give myself a top-notch tight end. Yeah. And then Jalen Hurts fell to the late 5th, or excuse me, the mid 5th, and I took him to have an edge at quarterback as well. So Brooks at the 6th round for me was interesting because I think he has very high upside, and it's very easy for me to handcuff him with Chuba Hubbard. So exactly. I would say if I'm in a true 0 RB build, I'm not afraid to kind of push the envelope and wait until like the 6th, 7th round to take my running backs. And but it's not for everyone. I think that for some people you can kind of mold the two strategies where you can start your draft wide receiver, attack those 3rd round guys, and I think you might like your results.
Oh, sorry, Theo. There we go.
Hey, you're back. You're back.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to put it. And I love the Jonathan Brooks, Chuba Hubbard putting them together because Chuba Hubbard's very undervalued right now. Because, I mean, he's going to be a pretty easy rental for the beginning of the season while they're kind of easing Jonathan Brooks in. I do agree his ceiling's going to be incredible once he actually hits the ground running and gets out there getting that volume. There's a lot of running backs that I'm actually comfortable punting towards in 0 RB. We're going to talk about a few of them. Zamir White, I think, is kind of more dead zone, but he's probably like the earliest I would go if I'm doing 0 RB. And then also these guys that we'll go ahead and start talking about. So you brought up Jonathan Brooks, but his other rookie running back in a similar-ish situation. Now, James Conner is better than Chuba Hubbard and going to be harder to beat out. But going almost 2 rounds later than Jonathan Brooks right now, what are your thoughts on this ADP discrepancy? And are you taking shots on Benson?
I'm taking tons of shots on Benson. And I think I have more Benson than Jonathan Brooks for sure when it comes to exposure. Benson's ADP's actually moved up a little bit. You were able to get him a little more cheap. he's converging with James Conner, and I think that's actually the market moving correctly.
Yeah.
James Conner's a guy who's 29 years old, coming off of a career high in rushing yards. Then they go ahead and they draft Benson in the early third round in the NFL draft. Benson is explosive. Benson is going to put pressure on Conner for weekly touches.
Mm-hmm.
And Conner is a guy who's played back-to-back seasons where he's played only 13 games. Older backs who have missed time continually, that's a difficult bet to make. James Conner's also seen his ADP go way up. Like last year, Conner was a value. You're able to draft him, as a low-end RB3 at times. Now James Conner is costing you RB25. So he's improved a little bit, but it's more of you're kind of drafting him like solidly in the middle of the dead zone. Whereas Trey Benson, I get a little bit more wiggle room. Jason, I'll say this. If Trey Benson went down and I think another back would get worked in, it's not like James Conner would have a massive workload. But I do think that Trey Benson, if James Conner missed time, would be ranked higher than Conner would at any point in the season. Like I think Benson to the moon if he had the opportunity. So even if I get like half the season or 5 game starts for Benson, if it happens to be the correct timing, that could really push my team to like a championship. I love Benson. We love him at Player Profiler. That's a guy that we've been ahead of consensus on him since before the NFL Combine. Like that's a guy that we had ranked very highly in our rookie running back rankings throughout the process. And now I think the market's catching up with him. With us, if you look at like keep trade cut, the market is reflecting where we've had Benson all along.
Yeah, no, it's been an incredible value pick for me. And I have to ask, because I think we're all okay taking Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard. But with Trey Benson, are you comfortable pairing him with James Conner? Or are you just like, it's Benson's the bet you're making?
You do not want to. So if you're in even on an underdog format, like the idea of like stack cuffing, drafting 2 running backs in the same backfield and betting on it, when it comes to guys that are in that range where they're both like top 30 running backs, I think you lose a lot of edge double tapping the position. I think if you're going to double tap the position, you want to look at a little bit wider range, and you don't want your RB2 in that backfield to be pushed up so high. You lose edge when you double tap like that. I think you make a single bet on this backfield, even in best ball. And when you get to redraft, it's a very poor strategy. Double tapping these ambiguous backfields in redraft, it's an alluring thing, but if you want to double tap in redraft, just wait and double tap Zeke Elliott and Rico Dowdle. It's incredibly ugly, but if one emerges as the majority volume guy in the Dallas backfield, I'm gonna be able to get some solid scoring weeks out of it, and it's not going to cost me anything. If I double tap like the Arizona backfield, I double tap the Cincinnati backfield, I double tap the Tennessee backfield, then it might end up being a 50-50, 55-45 split. And it's like I'm kind of throwing darts at which one to start and hoping one gets hurt. That's not the way to play it. You want to double tap. Like when we talked about the Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks, you're talking about like a 10-round difference between the two. Chuba's a 15th rounder. Brooks a 6th, 7th rounder. That's easy to pull off. You don't want to double tap where it costs you the opportunity cost of getting like those other backfields, the wide receivers, all those values you're going to pass up in order to jam in the 2 from the same team.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially in the Benson case. That's the bet I'm making. Everyone listening, James Conner has literally never once had a fully healthy season. He has been injured every single year he's been in the league. The most games he's played is 15, which is a lot, right? I mean, like that's pretty standard for a running back. For the most case, he's averaged between 10 and 13, though. There's going to be at least a few weeks where Trey Benson is that RB1. I think if he gets that, even if James Conner comes back, it's going to be his backfield going forward. Even if it is split, he's going to have the higher opportunity share. He's got the lower ADP. He's got more juice. You got to get Trey Benson. And, Theo, you said don't do this, but I actually am double tapping both of these Titans running backs, or did. They're my RB 5 and 6 in Scott Fishbowl right now. I got them in the 8-12-9-1 just a couple days ago. And I'm doing that Tony Pollard is my flag plant. I think he will end up leading the backfield. But when I look at this Tennessee Titans offense, I just see them wanting to pass and pass and pass and pass and pass. When I hear Callahan talking about this backfield, it sounds like he wants to use them interchangeably. And so I think they can both very much produce in PPR formats. And so I am okay with the Titans just because they're both pass catching running backs. But have I made a grave mistake?
I think in a large scale field like Fishbowl, you never know. Tyjae's interesting. If Tyjae's used as a returner, then maybe you're going to be able to use both because like the weird scoring. I'm not even trying to grasp my head around Scott Fishbowl scoring, but like I think that you got it out of your system. You can avoid doing it now when you get in like your redraft leagues in the summer, Jason.
I know. I was like, I pressed the Pollard button, and then I was like, oh man. But I also want Spears, and I was like, screw it. I'm just also going to get Spears. I did think about the kick returning thing. But I like the backfield. Like I said, I'm preferring Pollard. I think that this new regime brought him in for a reason. And I think that we will see some of the efficiency that we saw from him in Dallas. We saw like week 11 onward last year. He got a lot of his efficiency back recovering from that fibula fracture. So I think he'll have his juice back in Tennessee. Are you taking Tyjae Spears, though? I think you are.
I've had this conversation like with Billy, and we also had on First Class Fantasy several times. And I've also talked to Nelson Sousa, who I split some teams with, and he's at FTN, one of the best high stakes guys out there successfully. I think I don't mind either. There is an argument for Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears in sort of a zero or hero RB build. Mm-hmm. You brought up the positives of that offense where they're sort of like for like replacements for one another. I do agree with you that both of them have high level ceilings when it comes to catching the football. We saw the last time we saw like a healthy Joe Burrow full season. I think Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon combined for like 125 targets. And I think that's sort of what Callahan wants to emulate in Tennessee, like they did with Burrow. Now, certainly Will Levis is no Joe Burrow, but even if he's a limited guy, using those running backs takes a lot of kind of heat off of him and a lot of pressure. So I think they're actually forced to use those guys as a receiver. For me, I'll take Tyjae slightly over if I had like to pick one because he's cheaper right now. And I think maybe he has just as much juice, but Pollard's fine. He's absolutely fine where he's going. They're both fine. I just wouldn't double tap it.
Oh, well. I mean,
except for the time you did it, Jason. That was a killer move.
Yeah. Well, and hey, to make it even better, Theo, when it got back to me, I was able to double tap Will Levis, DeAndre Hopkins. So now I'm just kind of stuck there, and I'm kind of happy
stack. You're stacked up.
I know. I like it a lot. Chig is still hanging around, so hopefully no one in my division is listening. But maybe I get a tight end 2 off of him. But
you might be able to slide Chig Okonkwo through, Jason, without somebody stealing him from you.
Oh, wait. Yay. I get Chig Okonkwo. But Tyjae Spears was so efficient last year. 5th in breakaway run rate, 6th in yards per touch, 5th in yards created per touch. I mean, the guy really, really was good. And you can't discount the fact that he was out snapping Derrick Henry on this team last year. Like, that is very difficult to do. And he did it as a rookie. So, I mean, I do think that he's definitely got some juice and a really great athlete. I just think there's room for both of them. Hopefully I'm right. I have a couple more questions for you. We've got to get your Bijan Robinson take at the end of the show. We've been waiting and waiting on the Sonic Truth. But before that, I want to just get your favorite running back sleeper. Just round 10 later, who's the guy you're drafting?
I've drafted a ton of Marshawn Lloyd.
Okay.
In pretty much every single format. I think that he's a little bit more of he's a discounted version of the Brooks Benson tier in Dynasty. I think that there's an outside chance that a year from now he could be the most valuable in this draft class in terms of a Dynasty asset. Mm-hmm. I think he's got two-way ability, athleticism, size, and he's in a system where by all accounts he's going to be used similarly to Aaron Jones. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to Josh Jacobs, like Josh Jacobs gave us that RB1 overall season 2 seasons ago, but he's a guy who's absorbed a lot of volume. He's 26 years old, and he's on a new team. Oftentimes you see the running backs who don't get out the gate are on new teams. It's not always a given. And I think it's going to be a little bit more of a Marshawn Lloyd gives me a handcuff plus role from the get-go. I think he is going to be effective like from week 1 on. And then when we get to the opportunity for Josh Jacobs to potentially miss some time, Marshawn Lloyd's an RB1 any single week that he's got the backfield to himself. And then Jaleel McLaughlin, I was drafting like clockwork for many, many drafts. And now he's sort of risen up where before you were able to get him in like round 13, round 14. Now he's sometimes creeping into like round 11. I think some round 10 shares. But he's a guy I still like when he's affordable. I think that he's going to have an opportunity to catch a ton of passes in Denver. I am fading Javonte Williams. I think that you take shots on a Jaleel McLaughlin, and then if you want to double tap it with like an Audric Estime or even like a Blake Watson in round 20 of managed redraft leagues, you might have something there. Just a Javonte Williams fade, and also I think Jaleel can catch a lot of balls. Those two guys I've drafted a lot. I think they're both super interesting. I think they both have upside. They're the kind of guys that I think can beat ADPs, and they're the sort of players we need to kind of pull off these sort of builds.
Yeah, Marshawn Lloyd is one of my favorite running backs from this class, especially just his confidence. When I was down at Mobile, thanks for sending me down there. I got the chance to interview him, and he literally was like, "I'm the best running back in this class." Like, I just love that type of confidence. He showed it at the Senior Bowl. I mean, from day one, he was dominant. Everyone's favorite running back from there. And I mean, there were some good ones there. Kamani Vidal was down there, for example, but Marshawn Lloyd was clearly a class above, especially as a pass catcher. Just so much explosive. He averaged 17 yards per catch at USC last year. Yeah. That is an insane number. So I love it a lot. And it's just a great Packers offense. My favorite sleeper, you might hate it, is Jalen Wright. That's kind of the one that I'm taking a lot of with the injury concerns for Mostert and Achane, on top of him just having some of that explosiveness and having the weight at 210 pounds with the size of 5'11". I think he's going to be very durable and stay within this backfield all season and have some serious contingent upside if either of those guys go down. So I want a ton of his shares.
I think that's fine. Like, even if you're into Devon Achane at ADP, even if you're into Raheem Mostert at ADP, like when I did my Handcuffs article, I had like a special section for Jalen Wright as a guy to prioritize. Mm-hmm. I just took him in the was it the 11th round of an FFPC draft like yesterday. And it's you nailed it. With most of these handcuff backs or handcuff plus backs, I have an opportunity to use these guys. Maybe if there's an injury, maybe if it's a guy who can carve out like a handcuff plus role. But with Jalen Wright, you nailed it. There's two potential outcomes where he can get on the field. And then there's a third outcome that we don't really factor in. It's maybe he's just really good and can carve out some touches. It's an offense that's going to support two running backs. So I do think that you have to understand, when you draft Jalen Wright early, you know that this might be like the first 6 weeks of the season, you might get nothing out of it. This might be a guy that gets a little bit, but it's sort of the betting on attrition, betting on it being a 17-game season, betting on Miami continuing to get big-time RB production out of two guys. And Jalen Wright, again, we talk about it, Jason, like, we don't take zeros when we're not using these guys. Somebody else will be in your lineup. So it's like Jalen Wright could potentially give you like 4 or 5 weeks of 14 to 16 points per game in PPR. If that's it, that paid off at where you're drafting him at ADP.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that we're even starting to hear a little bit of a potential Jalen Wright having a role, as Devon Achane came out a couple weeks ago and said they're starting to work him as a slot receiver extra, which is interesting. You know, there could be some times where, you know, he's out wide and Jalen Wright's in the backfield. It's just such a great offense that I want any piece. And we just seem to always be wrong about the Dolphins offense as a fantasy community. Like going to Chase Edmonds a couple of years ago, everyone was like, oh, it's him over Mostert. Last year it was Jeff Wilson over Mostert. So maybe we'll be wrong again. And it's just Jalen Wright's season. So anyway, I like your sleepers. I, of course, like mine. We've got to get that Brian Robinson take. This is a guy that I have been drafting a decent bit. He keeps just falling into our laps, and it's not usually that you're able to get really a bell cow. Like he gets a ton of volume, and I'm assuming with a rookie quarterback, you know, they're going to have to lean on the run game a little bit. So I'm taking him at the end of the 9th round. We keep having it cut off on the Sonic Truth, so I've got to hear it. What's your Brian Robinson take?
Well, I like Brian Robinson a lot.
I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.